Welcome back to Sustained Overruled. I am the anonymous attorney. So we last left off, or when we last left off in the Ferris trial, I had indicated that I was curious to find out to hear from the jurors, right? So Core TV has interviewed a member of the Melody Ferris jury, and we are going to tune right into it. One moment.
More than 13 hours over 4 days, Melody Ferris is found guilty of murdering her husband, Gary, and putting his body on the backyard burn pile.
Shocked.
We, the jury, as the count 5, we find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, as to count 4, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, as to count 3, we find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, as to count 2, find the defendant guilty. And we, the jury, as to count 1, find the defendant guilty.
Both Scott and Chris Ferris broke down as that verdict was read.
Right.
And Melody Ferris's attorney, as we know, pointed the finger at Scott, claiming that he was the real killer. Melody Ferris is looking at life behind bars now. Her sentencing set to happen in December, most likely. And this morning, we have a very special guest we're so pleased to welcome here on Opening Statements. One of the jurors who heard the Burn Powell murder trial, Juror Bethany. Bethany, good morning to you. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start.
I'm having tech issues. I'm just trying to resolve. I don't know why that happened, but it did. So let me get back on the stream. Just a moment. One moment. I don't know why that happened. Anyways, this is Bethany. She is a member of I almost said Karen Reed. Karen Reed did have a hearing yesterday. But this is the Melody Ferris trial.
During this case.
For me personally, it was just the overwhelming. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with what influenced you the most hearing this case?
I need to
For
know.
me personally, it was just the overwhelming, in my opinion, evidence that she was there during the opportune times for the murder and the cleanup.
Right.
And that even though Scott had presence on the property during, those like between 12 and 6 a.m., it didn't seem like there was any kind of an opportunity. It didn't seem like there was any kind of a motive.
Bravo.
So just all those things. For me personally, it was just kind of like that logical conclusion.
And that's what I said in my other streams. Scott did not have a motive to get rid of his father.
Of if nobody else is here to do it, then who did?
Right.
And then you add in all the other stuff, and that just supported.
I personally think that, I'm not saying the defense would have been successful if they pointed the finger at an outsider, but pointing the finger at Scott was a bad move. It was a bad strategy.
for me personally, I wasn't quite there until over the weekend. I took over the weekend, and when I came in on Monday, I felt very at peace about what I thought had happened.
Was there ever a moment that you would say was
signal.
pivotal? Was there ever kind of something with the evidence that made you go, oh wow, this for me might have really tipped the scales of justice?
Yeah, the phone calls, with
Rusty.
Yeah, with Rusty. There was a lot of conversation that I felt, there was a lot of opportunity. I felt like she could have denied it. She could have been more clear that it was a
Yeah, the phone calls with Rusty for sure. And as I said, the statement about Gary being in the burn pile before everybody else knew about his disappearance, that was it for me. But the conversations with Rusty, without a doubt, they were suspect.
Calling to her and that she had nothing to do with it. But to me personally, I felt like they just were getting their story straight carefully because they were aware that they were being recorded. So, yeah.
Sure. Bethany, being on a jury like this, obviously you're instructed not to look at any social media, watch any media about it, all of that. So perhaps unbeknownst to all of you, maybe you've found out now that the verdict was in. I don't know if you looked at it, but there was a great debate going on for the duration of this trial. Tell me, what do you think? Let's start with, what do you think happened? Because there were debates about who was the perpetrator, debates about how the killing happened. What's your
I don't think it matters
belief when it comes to how Gary Ferris was murdered and how he got on that burn pile?
I think that, first of all, I thought that it was odd that she left out the part where at least his phone traveled to a restaurant.
Okay.
So I think at some point while he was gone, the plan was decided to be executed.
Right.
And then when he gets home, it happens. For me personally, it didn't matter whether or not it happened in the house or it happened in the yard. I didn't really care where it happened. I feel like the house showed evidence that something happened in the house.
Right.
But I personally think that it's not difficult to imagine that she could have moved the body. Yeah. When we got out to the site, it felt like it was a bit steeper than it looked in the pictures. Okay. I know my own personal strength. I know I'm a bigger lady than she is, but I don't have any mental reservations. If I had to move something with everything available, I would have figured out a way to do it. Like that was not a stretch for me at all, the movement of the body.
I guess, we've all come to the conclusion that the defense attorney's demonstration, I say it was fertilizer. On Reddit, somebody else said it was called something else. To me, it looked like fertilizer, so I'm going to go with fertilizer. The demonstration was not as effective. It could have been, but he kept talking.
I've forgotten. That was,
Yeah, no, that's what I wanted to know. Yeah, did you think that the killing happened in the basement or outside?
I think it was shot in the basement. I think it was shot in the basement. Mm-hmm. My mental image of it is he made his way outside to some degree, and then he died, and she used equipment, or she just used gravity to get him down into that burn pile.
What about the track? Oh, go ahead.
That was another thing that was a huge problem for me, was the fact that if not her, then somebody else did it. If somebody else did it, how are you unaware? That was a huge thing. Being completely unaware of shots fired.
That is actually great. I did not think about that. Right. So that is a great point, because if Melody Ferris was on the farm, or the luxurious petting zoo, as Amanda would put it, if somebody else is involved, right, and she is, in theory, innocent, she definitely would have been aware about what was happening on the property. So that's a great, she made a great juror.
A body that size being moved, a body that size continuing having, I believe the fire had to be tended to. Somebody had to tend to it. And I don't see that happening without her being aware of it.
Sure.
Especially since she's up on the phone till 2:00 in the morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Bethany, I want to play a clip for you of when you all were deadlocked on Monday, that moment where the judge made that announcement and everybody watching this trial, engaging in the great debates online was going, oh my goodness, they're going to go back in. Let's take a look.
We have a note that says that they are hung and do not feel like they will be able to come to unanimous verdict. So my plan is just to bring them in and tell them that they're the best qualified jury that there is to hear this case, and to send them back out and tell them to continue deliberating.
Oh boy. Okay. Did you expect the judge to tell you to go back in and keep deliberating?
Yes, we did. We knew he was going to tell us to go back in and deliberate. I feel like that was.
And as I said in my previous stream, Melody Ferris is the perfect defendant. And what I mean by that is she is the type of defendant that juries would actually go to bat for. Unlike Sarah Boone, I mean, the evidence was different as well, right? If I'm just being fair. But she was the perfect defendant because a jury would give her the advantage of, not even just the jury, by her very being, she's the type of defendant that would be afforded all of their rights, that would be afforded all of the benefits. And in order to come to a verdict, a unanimous verdict of guilty, they certainly would have, and I believe in this case, they did give her the benefit of the doubt. And not just the benefit of the doubt, but the jurors actually complied with, they definitely complied with the law in this case. Juries are a bit, iffy. You never know.
There was a couple of us, I don't think me so much, but there was a couple of other people that definitely had more reservations and concerns about convicting. And I don't know, I just felt like it mentally, emotionally, it was a lot for us.
Right.
But we went on a lunch break, we took a breather, we came back, and we just got right back into it as if we had in the beginning, and just worked through just a couple more little things that a couple people had issues with, and then we all felt very solid about our decision.
Yeah.
What were those big issues?
Even during my previous streams, I had indicated that this case, to me, I had no doubt that Melody Ferris committed the crime against Gary. But I would not have been shocked at a hung jury just because of the status that Melody occupies in society. I mean, I did talk about that at length. And I used to be a prosecutor, and I also used to be a public defender. And when you've worked enough in the legal system, right, based on the facts, I've tried a lot of cases too. So based on the facts, usually, I cannot predict an election, but I can certainly predict outcomes of cases. The only one so far that I've not had any, major criminal cases would have been the one out of Florida. I just forgot. Can see the kid's name. I forgot. The Zimmerman trial. I was wrong about the verdict in that one.
That led to the deadlock.
I would say the lack of putting the gun in her hand, the lack of, how did she get the body to there? The lack of evidence definitely caused.
And that's what I was saying. Before Martha Jane testified, right? To me, at least, it was clear that Melody had the opportunity to get the way the evidence was. I should have finished that thought. In any event, the way the evidence was presented, I was under the impression that Melody secured a firearm from Martha Jane's home. That was my thought process. I don't think that Martha Jane's testimony was necessary because it made the case a bit sloppy, but you actually don't need a firearm. in order to get not even just a firearm. You don't need a weapon in order to get a conviction under these circumstances.
Doubt, but we overcame that with all the other evidence that was there.
Right.
Sure. Bethany, I want to talk to you about Scott Ferris, because we know the defense squarely pointed the finger at him. I mean, literally, the defense attorney you saw pointed the finger at him in the closing argument and was saying that he was the one who killed his dad. Was the jury ever stuck on that idea?
Not for very long. That was one of the first things that we did, was rule out everybody else. We just looked at what they were saying about everybody else. And did we find that there was enough evidence to consider them as...
This was actually a really good jury. I must admit, this was an impartial jury, and that's exactly what you want.
A reasonable doubt. And Scott was the last one. He took longer. But in the end, that was another thing, the CPAP machine. Right. We don't think that if he would have been alive, and killed overnight, he probably would have been attached to that CPAP machine. That's why there's just so many things that they're little things, they're not direct things, but logically you put them together and nothing else makes sense.
Did you feel that the state of Georgia presented a clear legal theory about how Gary Ferris was killed, where he was killed, how he got onto the burn pile, and who did it? Did you feel like they made everything crystal clear for you as a jury when you went back to that room?
I feel like they made everything as crystal clear as they could. And there were actually big pieces of evidence that we didn't even really look at. We didn't, like the phone call mapping where it had like activity at different times and different, when she'd call phone calls. We didn't really look at that much. I can't remember the other things. There was a couple of other things that we just didn't look at very closely. But I think what they did a very, very good job of is they just kept honing in on that same point. She's the only one there. The motive was helpful, but even the motive was not something that we spent a lot of time trying to decide what is the motive. It was the timeline. We started with a timeline. We ruled other people out, and we just tried to see, could we see it any other way? We couldn't see it any other way. And then she did it.
Sure, and the state doesn't have to prove motive, as you know. It helps, sure, if it's there. What about the tractor? Did you believe she used that in any way to get Gary's body on the burn pile?
Yeah, I mean, some people did. I wouldn't say that she didn't, but I don't think that she would have needed to use the tractor to move the body.
Did you find Melody Ferris to be cold when you were watching her?
I mean, I guess I didn't really look at her much. My focus was always usually on like the witnesses or the prosecutor or the defense. There were a couple of times I looked over at her and I did see her crying. I think I saw a different array of emotions in her, but I definitely put a picture together of who I saw and who I was hearing on those phone calls and, seeing on the text messages and stuff like that. So I don't know if I would say
that's, as I said in my previous stream, the appearance of a defendant does make a significant difference. It does.
She was cold, but I don't know how to answer that.
Did you find it at all disrespectful that she didn't stand for the jury when you all would enter the courtroom and exit?
And that was another thing. The lawyer had mentioned that, and I didn't even notice that she didn't stand for us. But I did watch stuff when I got home last night, and I did realize that was a big issue for people that she didn't stand. I mean, when you walk into that jury box, like me, I'm just focused on what chair am I going to sit in. I sit in that chair, and then I just start paying attention. I tried to not pay attention too much of the gallery and everything.
Sure. What a great juror.
She's a fair juror. She's fantastic.
You were, and your colleagues on the jury were. I mean, you all took this case very seriously. You didn't rush a verdict on a Friday for the weekend. You all did a fantastic job, and that's really what anyone can ask for. It's just to go through the evidence, take it seriously, uphold your oath. Would you do it again, Bethany?
If I had different circumstances in my life at the moment, I probably would. But I'm going to probably take the rest of the week off to just relax,
Atta girl.
debrief.
It's mentally grueling. It really is.
is.
Mentally and physically, too. Just sitting still. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Bethany, it was wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you, Bethany. That was great. I see that Melody's attorneys interviewed, right? I see that they interviewed briefly. Not briefly, at least the video is 34 minutes. I don't know if that's brief or not. But I would like to take a look. We're just going to skip through the video and see what we can gauge from this. One moment.
Murder trial. It's convicted. Percentage of Court TV viewers.
All right.
Check this out. I'm going to show you how I afforded this
Get
car.
through this ad.
Okay, you ready? All right, $118 for car insurance.
And we
Like between 12 and 6 a.m. It didn't seem like there was any kind of an opportunity. It didn't seem like there was any kind of
Motive and opportunity. So she's looking at the timeline. You surprised?
Yeah.
Well, we talked to him yesterday, Vinny, and we spent a lot of time in the trial trying to exclude, because we believed it was kind of wrongfully presented at way too late to us, the geofence evidence that she's referring to.
And the geofence is building the timeline for the prosecution.
Okay.
So when you say it's presented to you late, what do you mean?
After the trial started.
Oh, during the trial,
We got it October 2nd while we were still in jury selection.
Wow.
And then they actually added more to it about midway through the trial.
I didn't know you could do that in Georgia.
We objected.
I know you objected. How unusual was that?
Very unusual.
Okay, well, you have an advantage though, right? Because you can speak to your client. Like your client can tell you where she was all the time.
It's not her phone. It's Gary's phone.
Okay, so it was Gary's phone where he was, as opposed to her having the opportunity. So that's what you have a problem with. Was the timeline a problem for you guys? Because you're pointing the finger at Scott, right? So how did you see the timelines in this one?
Well, after we got the new geofence information from their expert, who was Investigator Harris. So once we got that information, it didn't really change our timeline so much as the night of the 3rd, but it changed the timeline of the morning of July the 4th before Melody left to go to Lake Lanier. And before that time had just been a gap. There was just no evidence of anything going on at that point in time.
Right. But you do have the advantage, right? Like you can ask Melody, like, where were you? Like, and she would remember that. I know you can't tell me about attorney-client discussions, but like the defense does have that, like in their pocket. They can always speak to the defendant.
That's true.
You can. And she didn't testify though.
She did not testify. And if you remember, there was some testimony about that day, July the 4th, going to Scott coming to the house first thing in the morning, getting the debit card, going to the bank, coming back, things like that.
Let me ask you this. Like so much of this trial was about family dynamics.
Right.
Did you know Gary Ferris? Because he's a lawyer in Georgia. You guys are lawyers in Georgia. You didn't know him?
Never knew it.
No.
And so as you're uncovering what's going on in this family, what surprised you the most, or what was eye-opening about it? Because for us who were watching this trial, it was sad, obviously, because of this family imploding in front of us and watching it all. But for you, trying to figure out the truth and trying to figure out this case, what did you think of this family?
We heard in the phrase kept being used throughout the trial from Chad Bruce. He used the phrase, the Ferris wheel. And that's been used, of course.
I used it.
You've used it.
Yeah, we started to use it.
It was their life for 20 years, and we spent so much time, and especially with the witnesses in the case.
I thought garden bank accounts. Since I got on the case, I think it was June 2019. That's exactly what everybody said. It was like they are married, but it is separate. They live completely separate lives.
Yeah, I don't want to deal with.
To me personally, I felt like they just were getting their story straight carefully. Because they were aware that they were being recorded.
I want to hear about this.
Right. They know they're being recorded, but as we listen to it, and I think this is another overall issue with Melody, is her demeanor. Like, I've watched a lot of trials. There was no warmth coming from that seat. And unfortunately, for someone when they're on trial, they're being judged, right? Right? We don't judge people in real life. You live your life however you are, you are. But she came across as sort of cold. And you listen to those phone calls, and they sound like they're sneaking, like they're talking about something else.
I don't expect it
and to me, the vibe coming from her there and from the phone calls, Was there a discussion at all about like, how do we handle this? Or is there a way to warm up Melody?
Well, I'll tell you, so Melody, to try to turn somebody into something they're not, then that comes across as fake.
Right.
You know, we wanted Melody to be authentic to herself. We knew they were going to hear these phone calls. So there were
I'm sorry, but he gives terrible advice, or at least in this context. What I've seen so far, him telling Melody not to stand, or I don't know who advised who, but Melody not to stand, that was terrible advice. And how do I put this? When you go to a job interview, okay, folks tell you to be yourself. That does not actually mean be yourself. It means be charming, pull in the folks that are interviewing you. The same, in my books, apply to trials. You always want your client to be liked. That's just how, at least that's how I practice. You want your client to be liked. You want your client to draw the jury in. And because if your client's liked, they're going, not that they're going to bend, how do I put this? They're just going to make excuses for her. You want the jury to make excuses for your client.
times when she cried during the trial.
There were absolutely when the kids were testifying, for sure.
Totally authentic. I mean, she was a totally authentic version of herself throughout the entire trial, and I think that goes better than all of a sudden they're hearing one thing and they're seeing something else. That's just the way Melody is.
Right.
But there is compassion in her heart, and the jury was able to see it because the jury. I watched that video today.
And what did the jury tell you about Melody? Did they talk about that at all?
That's exactly what she said. That phone call, if you recall, when they came out, that's the exact portion that they wanted to hear. Not the whole phone call, just the 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were actually looking for is Melody didn't say when she was asked by Rusty, did you say that?
Right.
She didn't say absolutely not.
Right.
She actually went on and talked about something else for a minute before saying, I don't recall.
That does make a difference, at least in the cases that I've had. It's not always the case. There can be different circumstances to explain why a person would not deny their involvement. But that does signal, it does signal a lot. Because even if we go to the Karen Reed, I know I talked a bit about Karen Reed's hearing when I started this stream. But Karen Reed, I don't remember the specific date, but she was on the steps of the courthouse. And the reporter asked her, did you do it? And she didn't say no. So when a defendant stands with an accusation as huge as the one in the Melody Ferris trial, you would think, and I mean, there is an rule of evidence when it comes to this, but there was almost a duty on Melody Ferris to deny any involvement or causing about the demise of Gary.
And then ultimately saying, no, I think, not necessarily I think Scott did it, but Rusty eventually asked that question.
It's tricky because you're being recorded, right? So if you go into these big denials, sometimes people say, well, you're playing because it's being recorded, right? Sure. Was there any evidence that you wanted to get in front of this jury that didn't get in front of this jury for whatever reason?
Scott's failed polygraph.
That's huge.
That's huge.
Yeah, but that never comes in.
That never comes in.
Exactly. I mean, as a defense attorney, you're supposed to know that.
Never comes
in. A lot of my cross-examination, though, of Scott was from the polygraph interview, just to see how he would react, to try to trigger those memories. I was walking a very fine.
And there's a reason why folks fail polygraph tests. I mean, they're not kind of junk science. It's junk science. But there have been instances of folks telling the truth, failing polygraph tests, and it actually being discovered that they were in fact telling the truth the entire time, especially when reporting crimes and things of that nature.
In line, and I knew that. Jeffrey Fogus, he stood up and he objected fervently to me even getting into it. But it was important. I mean, he failed that polygraph. He ended that interview and he lawyered up.
It is inadmissible.
That is critical stuff that never got to be in front of this jury.
But it never is.
I
know.
It never is.
I know.
Right. So that's it. Was there anything else?
Well, we were somewhat. I mean, we obviously weren't trying to, set up some type of mistrial or anything like
absolutely.
that. We wouldn't do that.
Right.
But if Scott said something, because if he got an idea going back, thinking about that interview that the GBI did of him, and he slips up and says something, then
Door's open.
He opens the door himself, then we're just going to run right through it.
Right. So what did you think of the testimony of the children? Like, was that how damaging did you feel that was?
I think after we felt fine after they testified, after all three of them.
There was a big reaction from folks online.
But the jury, after we talked to the jury, the things they thought that people thought they cared about, they didn't. I mean, so the kind of diagram that the state came up with about the late night phone calls, they didn't care about that.
Nope.
They didn't care about that. They cared about the timeline. They cared about the geofence and some of the phone calls with Rusty, but not even all of them. They said, we didn't care about all that other stuff. So this trial that went on for a month, I mean, if they could have somehow honed in on it, it could have been so much shorter.
Could have been shorter, yeah.
Yeah, but you don't know who's being selected.
As you're going through the course of the trial and trying to read where you are, take us behind the curtain a little bit here. Are you making, like, after the end of the day, are you two getting together and saying, hey, that went well, this didn't go well? You guys watching the jury reaction at all to witnesses or moments and adjusting your strategy during the course of the case?
He does that. He's the one that watches the jury. I don't look at him. I believe in you try plenty of jury cases. You don't never know what they're thinking.
Right.
You can look at them and say, I think they're on my side, and they come out and they're not, or they are.
But you can look and see that they're tired. And when they're tired, sometimes we could go much further on a witness, but we're not going to do that. We're stopping right here.
Now, talking about, let's get to, I want to go to the fourth soundbite that I have for you.
All right.
Which is about where the murder took place.
Okay.
And here's what the juror had to say about that.
For me personally, it didn't matter whether or not it happened in the house or it happened in the yard. I didn't really care where it happened. I feel like the house showed evidence that something happened in the house. But I personally think that it's not difficult to imagine that she could have moved the body. When we got out to the site, it felt like it was a bit steeper than it looked in the pictures. I know my own personal strength. I know I'm a bigger lady than she is, but I don't have any mental reservations. If I had to move something with everything available, I would have figured out a way to do it.
All right, so this, and then we're looking right now at the video of where the burn pile is and the slope. And that's one thing she said. The slope was a little steeper than she thought when she went on the jury view to actually see the land. How important, this was a big issue for you guys, right? Because the prosecution saying he's murdered in the house and then somehow gets to the burn pile. He's over 300 pounds. She's $120. And that's just, the math doesn't work there for moving that dead body. But this juror didn't care because, and that's basically what the prosecution argued, right? You can use an ATV, you know, I mean, I had someone online saying, well, maybe they used one of the horses or something. Like,
I don't know about all that.
No one knows.
Yeah.
Why don't we know that? Why don't we know that?
Michael, talk about the crime scene.
Yeah, I think it would be because of the crime scene. I mean, essentially when they got there, we were actually talking to Detective Hayes afterwards, and, when he was talking to the jury, he was more of, we just thought we were going to go, that it was an accidental death and all of that, and it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. And there are people trampling through the crime scene. They drove the crime scene truck through the backyard.
And that's the thing.
And then
this defense focused so much on Scott when there were other avenues. I for sure thought that a theory that he took his, that does not explain the projectile or the bullet, and that also does not explain his in the burn pile. But still, a better theory would have been that he took his own life. To me, that would have been a better theory, because the problem with Scott, the holes in the prosecution's case, as it relates to Melody, can also be transferred to Scott. So it's not that clean.
And nobody investigated it. They investigated the burn pile inside the house and then they left it out. Nothing in between the house, nothing in the front, the barn.
I mean,
Things were just completely left because no one was in charge.
Literally, Vinny, they would look like right here on the floor in front of this table, but they wouldn't look out on the table or on the couch. They look for nothing. Just right there on the floor.
So what did you think the blood was from?
Oh, good question.
Or the luminol.
We had evidence that there was a dog bite, and Amanda testified to that the week before he was bit by Motley.
Yeah.
No.
On his ankle.
And that would account for that.
Absolutely
Is it
not.
possible that, I know you don't believe Melody did it, but whoever did it shot him at the burn pile?
That's what, when we were reading the stuff online, that's what people keep saying. And that makes the most logical sense.
Yeah.
Shoot him at the burn pile. He falls in. That makes it simple.
I still think, I would like to believe that Gary somehow made it to the burn pile. I do not, if it's more than one shot that was fired, sure. One in the home, the rest of them at the burn site, right? But I would like to believe that he somehow was able to make it, or at least he was ushered or escorted to the burn pile. I don't think the deadly shot was fired. But if that's in fact what happened, that is horrific. That is a horrific way to lose your life.
Then you get to the issue of, then why is there a bullet in the house? That's where I always come back to. And then you're relying on...
With no blood around the bullet.
No blood around the bullet.
We kept pointing to that over and over again.
So you've got this bullet in the house, and then it's like, well, Melody still, if she shot him at the burn pile, but then she planted the bullet in the house.
No,
that doesn't make any
sense.
sense.
No.
So that's always been for me. To me personally, that was doubt right there.
Okay.
So when you looked at this
reasonable.
jury, when you did the jury selection, right? You go through, you're in Cherokee County. Every county has their own sort of vibe.
Sure.
Right.
Was this a place where you felt, hey, listen, we could be successful in Cherokee County? Or is Cherokee County one of those places where it's much more difficult to defend someone?
You know, I actually think, Vinny, when we picked them, we believe that to be a fair cross-section jury. You had old, you had young, you had men.
I think it's often phrased that attorneys, the defense, the prosecution, attorneys in general are selecting a jury. I think of it as the reverse. I don't think that we pick juries. We exclude them, right? That's what you can do, but what you're left with is what you're left with, or who you're left with is who you're left with.
Men, women, blue collar, white collar. We had everybody on that jury. We really thought that, and they did, and they told us afterwards that they were tormented. They would go home, they would have nightmares. They worked.
Wow.
I mean, they worked diligently. They're terrified of making the wrong decision. So
Right.
at the end of the day, it made us feel better as attorneys
Right.
that they worked on this case. They worked through their thoughts. We disagree, obviously, but Cherokee County in itself, I believe, is typically a good place to have trials. They're people that question the government. And
Right.
for a defense attorney, that's good.
That's good. And I've seen that start to happen around the country now.
Right.
There's a lot more skepticism, which as a former prosecutor, not the best thing for us. But anyway, John Luke Weaver, Michael Ray staying with us. We've got more to get to in our reaction to this big verdict. I got some other things that I want them to respond to.
All right, so I will end my stream live right here. I'll be back at 9 p.m. Eastern time. This is impromptu. I basically just came on here and thought I would give my thoughts on this because otherwise I'm probably not gonna, tend back to it. I'll be back 9 p.m. I'll be talking about the YSL trial. We're either gonna go through the lead investigator's testimony or we're gonna talk about Kayla Bumpus. We're probably gonna start off with Kayla Bumpus. In any event, thank you for watching.